we've had since the strike. But in 2005, we also changed the whole leadership in this local. After the strike, when you had 1,800 people working there and only 1,200 jobs after the strike was over. So the company, they knew what they were doing. I mean, it wasn't like they were just reacting to workers' demands. They had a plan on how to get rid of the old workers and how to get rid of the old contract, and basically they won. And so the strike was over in '86. The replacement workers, or scabs, depends on how politically correct way you want to call them. They were the ones that was in the plants. They closed my plant in 1987. I was able to transfer up here with a transfer agreement that was still in place. And then the first call back from the list was 1989, late 89, 90. So it took 5 years to actually call back the ones that wanted to go back to work after the failed strike. And then, then once they, the company, when I came up here, it was night and day difference, because they didn't want people to quit, because then they'd have to call people back. So even though they weren't paying as much, these workers had never made what the workers had made before. So it took a while for a lot of them to understand why you needed a union in there. And now here we are 20 years later, and it's conditions are really kind of almost like it was before the strike. So, but you don't have a lot of history of people understanding what a union is. So it's really pretty hard to, and our whole industry is that way too, with the destruction after the 80s. At one point in time between the Hormel strike and the next 5 years, at one point in time, virtually every packing house worker was out on strike, but they were all a strike at this plant, at this plant, at this plant, at this plant. There was never company-wide strike like had been used back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. So it was just, picking us off one by one. And now we're fighting to work our way back up. So that's a little history of the strike. And this town, one of the reasons why I moved into this town, because I came from a packing house town, because this was one of the cleanest packing house towns I'd ever seen. I mean, usually you think of a packing house town, you think of, a river and shanty towns. And this town had the shanty towns back in the 30s, but because of the profit sharing agreement and the no layoff clause that they had, or the year notice of layoff clause, there was peace between the company and the union and the workers, because the workers knew that they had a job and they didn't have to worry about their next paycheck, and the company knew they had an established workforce that they didn't have to worry about looking for 50 people down at the hiring hall next Monday. This is I want to go back just a little bit. The spark that was caused by the 30 strike here in Austin, Minnesota, was a spark in the industry that caused organizations, because you had people in Chicago and St. Louis and Kansas City saying, wow, if those bohunks up in Austin, Minnesota, wherever that is, can go on strike and win, we can do it here. I mean, nobody, it wasn't like Austin was on everybody's map, like Chicago or Kansas City. So that was some of the reasons for the upswing. Part of the reasons on the downswing also was the reorganization of the industry going out of Chicago and out of Kansas City into little burgs like, Osceola, Iowa, and little towns. And that was the company's plan to get out of the cities where there was a lot of people that could conduct strikes to these little tiny farming communities. And then IBP, IBP. If you go back into the 70s when IBP was born, and IBP was really just, I think, born out of 3 farmers wanting to have an ability not to have the big packers dictate the prices that they're going to pay for their hogs. So they started up their own little slaughter facility and called it Independent Beef Packer or something, Iowa Beef Packer. And when the attempt to organize IBP as it got bigger, the IBP had a new product. It was called boxed beef. Instead of taking the carcasses to the stores and the meat cutters cutting them up, you know, when you go to the counter, is they would ship it to the stores in a box, you know, like a quarter beef or a side or a belly, and then they didn't have to handle the big thing. So they had a new product, but they also didn't have any markets. And you know, you have to have a market to sell your product. So there was an agreement between IBP and Dakota City, wherever, Peterson, whatever his name was, and a union official in New York City to bring, because every time they bring it in a shipment, it would just sit on the docks and rot, because the union workers wouldn't handle it. But there was a deal cut to allow into New York City, and the union guy ends up going to jail, and Peterson ends up with a fine, but now he's in the largest market in the United States. So, I mean, that was his end. You know, we had an opportunity to win. But on the other side, the union, you know, the company also told the union at that point in time that, look, we'll pay, we'll recognize the union, but we want to pay 10 cents less than everybody else, you know, because, you know, we're just young and starting up or whatever. And the union said no, and so you had the IBP wars that started in the 60s. And it was those IBP wars, you know, the union used to pay for the lawyers for the strikers and pay for strike pay. So that was one of the parts that, you know, we don't really like to talk about. We were broke when we went into that merger, and so in that merger, our philosophy didn't win because we were the ones that were looking for help. And so then out of that merger between Amalgamated and Retail Clerks, we ended up with UFCW, and it's more of a business union versus a service union, or that's what I like to think of. Or, you know, it's more just, you know, you pay your dues and then you get your insurance, and, you know, kind of like a vending machine. You know, instead of actually social, a union to me is a social organization, people coming together to help each other. You know, that's kind of the story of how I got here, and a little bit. And I wish I was from here because it's really rich in labor history. So after the strike, the strikers became the officers of the union. And then in the early 90s, when P-9ers got back in, they voted in all new officers.